This is the first. The college football season is just a few months away. I am Ralph Michaels, and I will be walking you through the Gold Sheet top 25 teams for the 2024 season. We are starting with the Georgia Bulldogs. They are our number one team. At Gold Sheet, we make our number one team a 0 on our power rating numbers so we can see how far they moved from our expectations. These are our summer numbers. And let's look what Vegas thinks about Georgia going into this season. Well, there's no surprise. The national champion odds, they're only plus 320. To win the SEC, they're plus 190. To make the college football playoffs, the yes is minus 550. The no is plus 370. Remember, inflated odds now that there are expanded playoffs. Their season win total, 10.5, juiced to minus 10 both ways. And Carson Beck to win the Heisman, he's the front runner odds-wise at plus 800. Now remember, these are the summer odds. We're filming this June 18th. These odds will change, but again, at least you have a reference point of where they were at the time of this video. We're going to look at each team odds-wise, looking back at last year, looking at the 2024 team, breaking down the schedule, and we'll end each video with a bettor's edge. One ATS situation I want to point out for each team throughout these top 25 videos. Well, the Georgia Bulldogs last year went 13-1, 5-8-1 against the spread, 7-7 over under. And when I analyze a team in the summer or spring, I always want to make sure that their record was representative of what their stats were. And in Georgia's case, they certainly were. Again, 13-1 last year. They only played the number 44 strength of schedule, a very weak non-conference schedule. They were number 5 in both offensive and defensive yards per game ratings, offensive and defensive points per game ratings, and number 5 and number 9 in yards per game rank. But the most important statistical category I use, I break down their yards per play diff. What do they do on offense? Subtract what they do on defense. Georgia was actually number 3 in the country, plus 2.49 yards per play. Then I want to look at the schedule. Did they have any misleading wins? Did they win an unfair number of close games, those games decided between the sevens? And again, you break down their schedule. No, they did not. They outgained every foe. Their only loss on the season to Alabama in the SEC championship. And they did have 2 close games, those games 10 points or less. One of them was Auburn. They were tied late. They scored a 40-yard touchdown. They were minus 1 turnover in that game. And the other was Georgia Tech, a game they led handily in the fourth quarter, but gave up some late touchdowns. So Georgia's stats completely represent their record to me. I look at them as a 13-win team. And now let's look forward at what we can take out of the 2024 Bulldogs. Before I get to that point, I do want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I would certainly appreciate it if you hit that like button and make sure you follow Wager Talk. 160,000 people have already followed it. And when we post our next video and all of our top 25 videos, you will be notified immediately. And lastly, let me know if you agree with the Georgia assessment, if you disagree with the Georgia assessment, and more importantly, if there's anything you would like added to the future videos, reach out to us in the comments section. We would love to hear your ideas. And trust me, we will look at each and every idea. And if it warrants it, we will be adding your suggestion to our next video. We're going to start off every 2024 team preview with the conference snapshot. This is their power ratings, returning starters, returning production, quarterbacks, coaches, and recruiting. The SEC ranks are alphabetical. You see Georgia highlighted in black. Their power rating, as I mentioned, 0. The best in college football for 2024. 13 returning starters, 6 on offense, 7 on defense. They are number 29 as far as returning production goes. They do, of course, return their quarterback, and he's the Heisman front runner. And a rarity for a team that's had the success of Georgia. they returned their head coach, OC, and DC. Now, they did lose 3 or 4 coaches, position coaches, that got promoted to other teams. But again, it's rare to have a team that has had that top-rated cog, all 3 main coaches back. And the recruiter rank, they've been a top 5 team for half a decade, guys. Number 1 in the SEC and number 1 overall. So let's look at Georgia. And we know they have 13 returning starters. But it's more important to look at what they lost. If you lose 5 starters, that's one thing. If you lose 5 starters and they were all number 1 and number 2 draft choices, your losses are much greater. So each year at Wager Talk, I do a post-draft guide. Top 10 players in the first round, worth 8 points. Next 10 players worth 7. Rest of the first round worth 6. That decreases all the way down to 1 point in the final round of the draft. So to help you quantify what each team lost throughout these videos, Georgia lost 8 players to the NFL draft, and they lost 36 points. Now, 36 points may sound like a lot, but that was actually only number 6 this year. Washington lost 46 points on my post-draft grades. But to put it in perspective, how good was Georgia a few years ago? 3 years ago in the draft, Georgia lost 15 players and 63 points. When we're looking at returning starters, it's even more important to know what the team has recently returned. These quality teams, these super teams like Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State always lose multiple players to the NFL. I look at what Georgia returned in starters the last 4 seasons. They returned 11, 13, 10, and 13. So while 13 may not seem like a huge number, it's as many returning starters as they've had in the last 5 years. We're not really going to break out many players in this draft, but again, when you have the Heisman frontrunner, you have to talk about him. He, of course, back on the season, Carson Beck, 3,941 yards last year, a 24-6 ratio, and as I mentioned before, the Heisman frontrunner odds-wise. We do have to mention the biggest loss. Their tight end, a draft pick, someone who was their go-to guy. Will they be able to find a new go-to guy? I certainly believe they will. On offense last year, Georgia started 18 different players. 10 of those returned. On defense, Georgia started 19 different players. 11 of those returned. They also returned their punter and place kicker. Again, wrap that all together, and that tells you just why they are our number 1 team. As far as helping their receiving core, they did lose a few important pieces, as I mentioned. But when you look at their incoming transfers, they brought 3 of the top 40 offensive players transferring in, including wide receivers from Vanderbilt, Miami of Florida, and USC, and ETN from Florida, running back to help their offense as well. But the stat that jumps out to me for Georgia are the 4 returning starters on the offensive line. They have 70 career starts. They are experienced. They are a team that will lead this team, give Connor Beck great protection, help that run game, which of course we know helps the passing game. So Georgia, again, is set for this 2024 season. Now it's important to look at what their schedule looks like. Can we find situations that are a positive or a negative? And in the summer, I actually go through each team and I mark off spots that I think are a play against or a play on. It may not always work out that way, but it's something you do want to mark, do the work in the summer, and take a look. Let's look at Georgia's 2024 schedule. I mentioned at the beginning, they played the number 44 schedule last year. When you look at their schedule this year, based on our power rating numbers, they have a much tougher schedule. In fact, they are number 15 in strength of schedule for this upcoming season. Why the increase in the difficultness of the schedule? Well, last year they played an FCS team. They played Georgia Tech, and then they played Ball State UAB. This year, an FCS team, they of course playing Georgia Tech, but instead of UAB, they are now playing Clemson to start the season. But as we look at the schedule, you see we project them to be a 16-point favorite in Atlanta against Clemson, a favorite in every game. They're favored by more than a touchdown in 10 of 12 games. And most importantly, the most difficult game of the season for most teams is their first road game, especially if it's a conference game. Well, you look at Georgia's first road game. It comes after playing an FCS team at Kentucky. We expect them to be a 19-point favorite. Let's look at their two toughest opponents. At Alabama, we project them to be a 3-point favorite. But if you look at the bye week, they actually have the week off before playing Alabama, a perfect situation for the Bulldogs. Their next toughest game at Texas. Now, while they host an SEC team in Mississippi State, again, we expect them to be a favorite of almost by 5 touchdowns in that game. And guess who Texas has the week before they host the Georgia Bulldogs? They will be having their Red River rivalry. So a very difficult spot for Texas in the SEC for this 2024 season. Well, we talked about Georgia. We broke down their schedule. And now the important parts of these videos. Is there any betting information we can take out of this? There's a few things I want to share with you. And the first is this. Georgia was 19-1 in 2021 and 2022, and they were 18-15 against the spread. Well, when a team has that much success on the field and against the Vegas number, you can expect them to become a public team, with Vegas now starting to raise the lines in those games. That's exactly why Georgia last year started the season 0-5-1 against the spread. But when I break down Georgia over the last 3 years, they've been an excellent ATS team with a line of 3 touchdowns or less. And they have not worried about blowing out opponents when they're laying 3 touchdowns or more. When I look at Georgia as a dog or a favorite to -20, they are 16-5, 76.2% against the spread. 3 of those 5 ATS losses, neutral settings against Alabama twice, and a neutral loss against Ohio State. When I look at them as a favorite of 21 or more, they are only 7-15-1, breaking it down home and away, 3-10-1 against the spread at home, and on the road, they were 3-4 in that role. One quick note, remember, big favorites at home can dress up to 120 players. When you're on the road, big favorites do have a limitation. There's a travel restriction, some as low as 68, 70, 72. It's right around that number. It differs by conference. So when you're on the road, you can only take your first, second, and maybe a few third-string players, meaning you can't empty the bench in those big wins. 2 more things I want to mention about the Georgia Bulldogs. The Georgia Bulldogs haven't lost many games, but when I go back to 2017, if they are revenging a team off a loss in their previous matchup and they're now a favorite, they've gone 10-1 straight up in ATS, their revenge situation, the Alabama Crimson Tide. And lastly, I want to talk about the season win total. Now, this season win total is a best bet by Ralph Michaels. This is not a gold sheet play. I do want to preface this, but this will be an actual client release for me. Season win total over 10.5, -110 juice. I cannot see this Georgia Bulldog team losing more than 1 game. Yes, they have several tough road games, but we have a senior, experienced quarterback to take this team on the road. We have a powerful defense, 2 DBs that have 2+ years of starting experience. I'm very comfortable with this play. It is an actual best bet for me. The Georgia Bulldogs over the season win total. Remember, please take 1 second, give up the thumbs up, and make sure you become a Wager Talk TV subscriber. When we load our number 2 team based on our power ratings, you will get a notification immediately. I'm going to enjoy the heck out of doing these videos, top 25 videos throughout the summer. I'll talk to you with our number 2 team next time.